Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon and thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and welcome to our ISO awareness session. We're indeed happy to have you here today with us. And we'll be discussing a very interesting topic today. I know we would have seen on the flyer, we want to take away that fear from local businesses who want to pursue certification. So basically, this session is to help you to build confidence in preparation for your ISO certification audit. Now, I am Candell Bostwick. I'll be your host for this afternoon session. And for those of you who do not know me, I'm the third party licensed auditor for Global Compliance Service. I'm also an exemplar certified auditor with many years of experience conducting ISO management system audits, even before I would have started with GCS. So today I'll basically be sharing with you experiences that we've had and also information that will help you to be better prepared for your ISO certification audit. So we're indeed happy to have you. So welcome to all of you joining us on the Zoom, as well as those who are joining us on our Facebook page. So in terms of today's session, just to give you a quick outline as to what we'll be discussing today, and I look forward to your feedback. So firstly, I'll tell you about Global Compliance Service, and then we'll go right into the details of today's presentation, which is to tell you about the ISO certification audit, about the process and what it's like. And I'm hoping that at the end of this session, you'll be better equipped, you'll be more confident. Those of you who are preparing for your audit, right? Those of you who are thinking and considering certification, seeing that is very important for Guyana. I will expound a little more about what goes on in the audit so that you will be prepared. So for those of you, I know a lot of us should know about Global Compliance Service. And I would like to, before I go into further details, to just share with you some of the important things that you should know about Global Compliance Service, Guyana Inc. Now, Global Compliance Service is an internationally recognized ISO certification body, and it has been operating in over 36 countries for over 20 years. And GCS has seen the opportunities in many countries. So based on our headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, and we have an office in United States, we would open an office in Guyana. And why it's important for a certification body to be present in Guyana. With all that we see that is happening with development with the oil and gas industry and with international investors coming to Guyana, it's very important that our local businesses are able to provide confidence in the quality of products and services being offered. So that's one of the reasons why we would have set up this resident office in Guyana, which is a Guyanese-owned business operation. And we are here to provide professional and competent audit services to our local businesses. GCS is not only internationally recognized, which means that the certificates that we issue are accepted globally, and we're part of a community that once the certificates are issued, they've been recognized based on multilateral agreements. We are also recognized at a regional level by the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality, that is CROSSQ. And if you check their website, we're among the quality infrastructure institutions under the category of a conformity assessment body. For companies who are seeking certification services within CARICOM, they can also recognize that we are providing that service here in Guyana. We are here to offer competitive rates to local businesses. because we're utilizing Guyanese auditors. So basically, it saves the company the administrative costs to have auditors coming to Guyana and the other support fees that will be required for certification. And we've been able to do that since we're present in Guyana. We're also a member of the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the Ghana Manufacturers and Services Association. So GCS is very involved in Guyana. And as you would see with our slogan, it's local content, global recognition. So we're here also to support the local content policy. And just a reminder of our mission. Our mission is to provide unique opportunities for local businesses to be globally competitive. And that is very key. To be globally competitive through the provision of internationally recognized certification services. So indeed, our local businesses, especially the not so large businesses, the small and medium-sized businesses, now have an opportunity to become certified because of our presence. And our vision is to be the facilitator of globally certified Guyanese organizations. And you notice we're focusing on local content. We would like our businesses to grow and be more sustainable and also to be recognized internationally. And we would like to be a part of that process. I'm just showing you here a copy of our certificate. We are accredited by the International Accreditation Service. And basically our certifications are issued through our office in United States of America. And GCS Guyana's location is also identified on that certificate. So we recognize as an accredited office for GCS. I'll now share with you some of our clients. Over the past 2 years of operations, we were able to certify 15 additional companies to what our parent company would have certified. So in total, we're just over 25 companies in Guyana. And it has shown you the rapid increase in the number of companies who are able to attain ISO certification status because of our presence here in Guyana. So we're indeed able to fulfill our mission and our vision within the Guyanese market. In addition, we would also be providing support. For example, this forum that we're hosting is to help businesses to better understand the certification process. So I'm sure that all of you who would have registered would have some questions. You may want to seek some clarification on the process. Please feel free to ask your questions. So before I ask you to tell me what is it about certification that you're not clear about, I'm just going to go through some brief terminologies about the certification process. And one of the first terms you need to be familiar with, it's an audit. What is an audit? And you know, many times when we hear of an audit, persons get scared, you know. They want to know, what is it the auditor is coming to find out? Why is it I have to go through this audit process, right? And we understand that. But we will just like to tell you that a management systems audit, when you're going to go through a process, there's no need to be scared and nervous, because what we're simply doing is verifying that you have met the requirements of a standard. So we have a very standard definition here. I'll just spend a minute or two to go through it. It says, an audit is a systematic, independent, and documented process for obtaining objective evidence. Right? So it's one that is done using a process. There is a way in which you conduct audits. If you have a copy of the ISO 19011 standard, that standard provides guidance for conducting audits. So there is a way in which you have to plan for your audit, right? It's a systematic process and it's independent, meaning that the auditor would not have any engagement in your process. So as a certification body, and as the auditors who've selected to do your certification audit, they have to declare that they have no relationship with your company. They would have not worked, they would not have provided consultancy services like over the past 2 years. So there is that independence. So when you're doing the audit, that's why it's the objective evidence. You're there to evaluate whether the criteria has been met. So with our ISO certification audit, so for example, if you're going for ISO 9001, the audit criteria are the requirements of the ISO 9001 standard. So if you've met those requirements, right, you have nothing to fear. So basically, when we do the audit, we're auditing you to the requirements of the ISO 9001 standard, of which you would have applied to the certification body to and say, you know, we have a system in place and we are inviting you to audit us and verify, right, through that process that indeed we're meeting the audit criteria. So that is what the audit is about. So when a company would have applied, it's basically saying, yes, we are ready, we have the system in place. So with certification now, when we look at the process of certification, it's where an independent body would provide written assurance. So remember just now I said, okay, we come and we audit you to the audit criteria, whether it's ISO 9001, whether it's ISO 45001, right? Whether it's ISO 14001 management system standard. So we're basically checking. So as a certification body, our role now, right, using that independent audit process and gathering objective evidence, is that we would then provide written assurance. And when we provide written assurance, that means you're issued a certificate. And that certificate basically declares that you are conforming to the requirements of whatever management system you've been audited to, whether it's 9001 or 45001 or 14001 or the 29001 standard and so forth. So basically what this process is doing is that the certification body has certain requirements to meet. So that is why as an accredited certification body, we would, for example, be conforming to the ISO 17021 standard. And that standard ensures that we conduct audit within a particular framework that has been accepted by the accreditation body or the International Accreditation Forum. So it's very important that when we're doing audits, we ensure that is, and I can go back to the definition, we ensure that the audit is independent and we provide objective evidence, right, that your organization is meeting the audit criteria. So there is nothing there for you to be fearful about in terms of the audit. Now, just to delve in a little more into the certification audit, what is it all about? I know a person will be preparing for certification. You're probably at the implementation stage. You're probably at the stage where you're starting the process. You're probably at the stage where you've completed your internal audit, but you know you have some non-conformities and you want to know, what next? What can happen? So I'll go through for you now the certification audit. Now, our certification audit has 2 stages, and generally the ISO certification audit, once you have applied, it has 2 stages. You have the stage 1 audit and the stage 2 audit. And I'll just pause a minute to welcome our colleague from GCS USA who would have joined us, Mr. David Pope. And from time to time, he'll give us feedback and some additional information where it is necessary. So during the stage one audit, or what we will call the document audit, some persons call it the audit where we're planning for the stage two audit, right? At this stage, we're basically reviewing your documentation. Now, in every ISO standard, you're what we call documented information, retain documented information, and maintain documented information. Those of you who have copies of the standard, once you review the standard, you will see those requirements. Now, those are some of the minimum requirements that an organization has to meet. So I encourage you, you read from clauses 4 to clause 10. And wherever you see maintained documented information, you highlight it. Those are the documents. And retain documented information, those are the records that you have to maintain at a minimum for the standard. And if you look at clause 7.5, which speaks about documented information, the standard requires you to have the documents required by the standard, as well as those that are required by your organization, how you are fulfilling the requirements, right? So you have to ensure that you have developed a management system to meet the requirements of the standard in which you would want to apply for. So that is why we say, okay, ensure you meet the minimum requirements. And these are the minimum requirements that a certification body will audit you to. You can have additional requirements to ensure that your system is effective based on your culture. The standard doesn't tell you what level of documentation you should have or to extent, but it depends on your scope, the complexity of the operations, the size of your organization, the culture of your organization. So the standard is very generic. So some of the minimum requirements you would see, for example, you must have a scope for certification. And if you have the scope, you look at the exclusions. What elements of the standard are not applicable to our operations? And you basically have a little justification on that, okay? So when we talk of the minimum requirements, one of the critical minimum requirements that, we would ask for example, is your internal audit. I don't know if anyone would want to share with me, why would we want a record of your internal audit report, the last internal audit you've done of your entire management system before we come to do the certification audit? Anyone would like to respond to that question?
I can give a little thing. Sorry about that.
No problem.
It's to give an overview as to how far you are in the development of the QMS, at least the level of compliance. Yeah, because you will have a few non-conformances. I mean, the major ones would have a larger impact on the quality of service and our products, right? So once you have an idea as to how prepared you are in terms of how far you are in your implementation, that sets the tone for the certification audit so that you can address as many of the entities as possible. Somebody else could contribute. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Anna. Great feedback. Any other would want to say why they think we need that audit report as part of the stage one audit for review?
I actually agree with my colleague here.
Yes, so it's basically to get a determination as to how well your system has been implemented, right? Because if you look at clause 9.2 in the standard, which speaks to the internal audit, it says the organization needs to have an internal audit program, right? And that program really implies that you have to have a system as to how you'll do audits, a schedule, right? How often you will do audits, and also your auditors, how you go about selecting auditors to ensure that there is independence. And also you've considered the risk of processes. So there are certain areas that you audit more often than others. So with your internal audit, It will provide us when we review your audit findings, because that falls under the category of retained documented information, which is a record. We will be able to know from that audit that firstly, you have an audit program and you were able to do an audit of your entire system. Many companies will just do an audit of the requirements of the standard. But this audit should also address your business processes and your operations. So it's not just 9001, because if you review that clause 9.2, it says you're checking to see conformance to the requirements of the 9001 standard, as well as your own requirements for your processes. So for example, are you complying with your customer service process? How you addressing complaints? Your critical processes, are you complying with your procedures, if it's procurement, if it's for human resource in terms of ensuring competence of staff, right? Are you conforming to your procedure for delivering your particular products or service? Right? Are you conforming to your manufacturing instructions, your operational instructions and procedures, your own policies and your procedures that are not required by 9001, right? So when we review that audit report, we look to see, for example, as the organization audited the entire system. That is, have they provided evidence or given us enough objective evidence to show that they've audited from clauses 4 to 10 of the standard? Then have they audited their critical processes? They may be into manufacturing, they may be providing transportation services, security services, healthcare services, information technology services, engineering services, you're doing welding and fabrication, and the list can go on. Have they audited those processes that, are within the scope for their certification? And once we review that, even though they may have non-conformities, when we look at the non-conformities, the next thing we'll ask for is the corrective action process. Have they put systems in place to address the non-conformities? So even if your internal audit has identified non-conformities, and right in clause 9.2 says, okay, corrective action should be taken without undue delay. So once you have started the corrective action process, because you do correction first, which is the immediate action, and then you do corrective action to prevent the reoccurrence, right? It tells you that your system is working because you've identified a non-conformity and you've addressed the corrective action, or you're in a process of doing so, because there are some corrective actions that can take longer than others to be addressed. Right, so the internal audit is a good checkpoint for you knowing how well you implemented the system, right? So any more clarification on the internal audit process and why it's important for us asking you for that record before we move to the stage 2 audit? Great. So basically it tells us, as a certification body, how well you would have implemented your system and the level of conformance, and even to advise you as to whether you should complete the non-conformities or corrective actions, for example, if they're major, because if it's a major in your internal audit, it is most likely to be a major for your stage 2 audit or for your certification audit, right? Good. So that is what we do at a stage 1 audit, the document review process, where we basically verify the organization's level of implementation of the quality system, and the accompanying documents that we ask for would be available at that organization if they would have done the internal audit, because we're auditing the same 9001 standard that they're doing. So they will see any gaps identified. Now, once you have completed the stage 1 audit successfully. And the stage 1 audit, we can do it either on-site or off-site to review your documents. So if the company has a quality manual, we would review that, right? And we review your internal audit as well as your management review minutes or report. Management review is very critical too at the stage 1 audit, because it tells us that top management has actually evaluated the effectiveness and adequacy of the quality system. Basically, we want to see if top management acknowledges that the QMS that was developed, whether it's the environmental management system or the occupational health and safety management system, whether it actually meets the needs of the organization. Because the quality system must be addressed and it must be in line with the business direction and the strategic direction of the organization. We don't want two separate processes. Everything must be married together in one. So that is why it's important that we also ask you for that management review report. And those of you who have the standard in 9.3, you have the agenda items there, which can be followed at a minimum to ensure compliance. So after you would have passed through the stage 1 audit, if you have not completed your internal audit or management review, we advise you to have those done either before the stage 2 audit has commenced, or before we wrap up the stage 2 audit. So the organization has the options. Now at the stage 2 audit, this is what we call the on-site audit, where the auditor comes to your location. And at the same time, we review the documentation, as I said, the minimum requirements, right? For the standard as well as your management system. We look at your operational procedures and we look at the things that you say that you will do, right? So when you look at the quality system, the standard has already established the requirements for the management system to provide that confidence in your product or service. But we're also looking at how you will meet the requirements. So basically, we're there to confirm that the management system is meeting the requirements of the audit criteria, which is the ISO 9001 or ISO 45001 or ISO 14001. Or ISO 22000, etc. So in addition to that, we will then see if you're meeting regulatory requirements. Now, organizations, based on their discipline of operations, there may be some environmental requirements that are applicable. So at a minimum, we need to ensure that your business is, for example, registered, right? And that, for example, if you're an organization where your activities can have an impact to the environment, you probably have your EPA permits. We're not auditing you, we're just ensuring that you have these permits and license up to date, because one of the requirements you will find in all of the management system standards, the organization must be aware of its legal requirements and show compliance to its legal requirements, as well as contractual requirements. So, for example, 9001 addresses organizations who want to ensure that they're meeting or exceeding customer requirements. So those customer requirements will be in your contractual requirements stated by your customer, whether it's in the form of a contract, whether it's written or unwritten. So we see how well you're able to meet those requirements. And you know, some of the customer requirements might be a turnaround time, right? Are you able to deliver product to meet particular specifications? So when you get a customer request, we look at that process to see how well you are servicing that request. And if you're keeping the records, if you have the necessary controls in place to ensure that you're able to meet customer requirements. And there is where a lot of the monitoring and evaluation comes into play, monitoring of your processes to ensure that they meet requirements. So this is what the stage 2 audit is about, right? Basically, after we've confirmed you have minimum documentation, we're now coming to see how well you are demonstrating right? That you have that system, that it's working, and that it's effectively implemented. And when we say effective, it means that you're getting the results. And that is why the organization is often called to address, or one of the mandatory requirements or the minimum requirements would be to have objectives, quality objectives, right? And those objectives basically are set based on the context of the organization. So once you set the objectives to the context, you're able to show how the organization is able to improve its operations. Setting targets, some persons may call them the key performance indicators, right? So you look at how well you're doing it. So the auditor's role there is to verify your conformance with the audit criteria, your level of compliance with the audit criteria. And also what we do is identify if there are any areas for improvement. Very important. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the slogan that quality is a moving target, right? You could never say, oh, we have it here. Because once you work in the system, you're going to identify areas for improvement, right? Very, very important. So any questions? Anyone has any questions on stage 1 and 2 audits? Anything that you would like us to clear up at this point? Don't be shy, you know. We're here to respond to your questions and to provide clarification.
I actually have a few, but I will ask at the end of the
at the end of the presentation. Okay.
Yes, at the end of the
no problem. We may answer some of it too during the presentation. All right. So during the certification audit, or while preparing for the certification audit, one of the things we would expect, or the certification body would expect, or as auditors, what we expect when we come on site is that the organization is prepared. You must be ready. You must sensitize your team members of the audit and the benefits of the audit. So persons should not be scared. I'm sure from what I would have communicated thus far, you see there is nothing really to be scared about. And we always encourage the auditee to be cooperative. If there is during an interview, a question is asked and you're not very clear, you can always seek clarification. You don't have to be afraid of the auditor, right? Because you're there basically to represent your system to the auditor. Remember, the auditor is just there for a short period. And as an organization, you must be equipped and understand your process, because all we can audit you to is what you know and what you're doing. The auditor won't ask you anything that is not related to your system. But all we want you to know is that based on the interpretation of the requirements of the standard, and you have implemented your system, because we'll ask the questions that come from the standard to the requirements, you should be able to relate it to where it's being addressed within your organization. Very, very important. And that's why we encourage organizations to have team members trained so they could actually draw the link between the requirements and the standard and where the organization is actually fulfilling the requirements, right? Also, the auditor would be expected to have documents available for their review and for access, right? I know many organizations view confidentiality as a very important component of their operations. And I must tell you that as auditors or as licensed auditors, we have to sign confidentiality and impartiality agreements before going to conduct any audit to declare that we have not had any interaction in terms of providing consultancy services or work with the company, right, within the past 2 years, and also to ensure that that information that is seen during the audit remains there. The only time confidentiality may be broken or information given out, it's if called to court, right, to testify on some matter relating to that company. So there is no excuse for auditors to share or divulge information from organizations. And there's a very serious penalty if we do that as auditors. You can actually lose your license. So just to encourage organizations, once you're utilizing the service of an auditor, right? And that auditor is conforming, and it's a professional auditor, and they're conforming to the audit practice. They are committed to ensuring that your information remains confidential. They cannot share it with competitors or with other organizations, or even use the information that they have access to. So that is why we encourage companies to print documents and send it in hard copy to us, or present it in hard copy or PDF format. So there is no way of us actually duplicating or sharing those documents, right? But to date, I must say that, that has been an area that we're working with, and organizations have different preferences. Even if you have your system, everything is electronic, there's certain documents that we request for it to be printed while on site, because some we would actually take for your file for future reference, right? So this is basically what we expect from you during your audit. Now, at the end of the audit, we have what we call the audit findings. And I know this is an area a lot of organizations are interested in, and you want to ensure that the findings are in your favor, right? Like, okay, we have no non-conformities and everything is good. But basically, based on the definition for the audit findings, is basically results of the evaluation of the collected audit evidence against the audit criteria. Remember, we said earlier, an audit is used to collect evidence, right? And you have to evaluate it against the audit criteria. So when you've done that during the audit, you can have findings in the form of non-conformities or opportunities for improvement. So I'll basically spend a little time here now. So non-conformities can be graded as either major or minor non-conformities. And please be assured, if you get a major or a minor, it does not prevent your company from being certified. I would like to say it again, because I know this may be one of the areas that organizations are very keen on. Non-conformities do not prevent you from becoming certified. So I'll explain a little. So with a minor non-conformity, right? But first of all, a non-conformity, we know it's a non-fulfillment of a requirement. You have not met a requirement, either in the standard or in your own system. So minor non-conformity is one where you would not have fully met the requirements of the standard or your system, it's partially met, right? A major non-conformity is raised against those mandatory requirements of the standard that you have not met. So for example, if we do the audit and you have no records of an internal audit of your entire system or your quality system, or you've conducted no management reviews, right? Or you have not identified have not defined your quality policy. That's how you get majors. But if you think about what I told you about the stage 1 audit, when we're doing a stage 1 audit, we can actually tell you the potential areas of non-conformities. If we see you don't have your quality policy, You don't have your scope clearly defined with the justifications. You know, you haven't done your internal audit management review. So at the stage 1 level, you're able to know the areas that you have to address. So organizations should not really go to stage 2 with a major, unless when we go on site, the evidence provides that you have not implemented the standard or all of the elements of the standard. So there's where a major nonconformity can come about. Now, if there are major nonconformities at the stage 2 audit, this is the final stage of the audit, the organization is given an opportunity to implement the necessary corrective actions before we submit the audit report. So you get an opportunity to correct, and you have a maximum period of about 6 months. We encourage organizations to address it the shortest possible time. So for example, if you haven't done your internal audit, you schedule, plan, do your internal audit and say what you'll put in place to prevent this from happening again. So for major nonconformities, you do the corrective action, the auditor will come, or you email the findings depending on the severity. Once the auditor accepts your corrective action, the report goes through to the certification committee for a decision on certification. Minor nonconformities, you issue those also at the end of the stage 2 audit. But you have 1 year to have those addressed, meaning not that you will leave it for 1 year, but the auditor will actually verify the effectiveness of those corrective actions at your first surveillance visit. So the difference between having a finding as a major or a minor nonconformity is the time frame for you to get your certifications, but you have it in under your control. Because if you have a major, it depends on how long you take to address the major. We don't leave you to take forever. We say, okay, 3 months, the maximum. Oh, with this, you can fix this much faster. So we agree on a time frame before we close the audit, when you will address the major nonconformity. The minor one, we encourage you to address it also as soon as possible, because you might say, oh, we have a year, the auditor will come back. No, you can forget. And that minor, if you do not address it, and the auditor returns 1 year from that date, it can escalate a major nonconformity. And then at that point, you can then actually have your certification process in jeopardy, your status. You might say, okay, we may want to suspend the certification, and you wouldn't want that. Opportunities for improvement. Basically, the auditor would identify some areas how you can improve your operations, and it's a very thin line. Based on experience, they may identify, okay, this process can be improved. You know, you review it and see how you can improve. Sometimes there are recommendations, but it's up to the auditee or the organization being audited to consider those areas for improvement. There are no penalties, but we basically would identify things that if we know you don't strengthen them a little, it can result, or it may result in a nonconformity, right? And our audits are very, what we call it, process-based and value-added. So whenever a nonconformity is identified, the auditee clearly understands why this requirement is not being met, why it's a major and why it's a minor. So they have a clear understanding, because we want to help you to get better. So at the end of the audit, they can actually sit with their team members and brainstorm the corrective action to address the nonconformity and prevent its recurrence. So after we would have completed the audit, right, your audit report is submitted to the certification committee within 5 to 7 working days after your stage 2 audit. And that is why we're able to make a record time of issuing certificates within 4 weeks of your stage 2 audit. We'd have done it in 2 weeks before, you'd have done it in 3 weeks before, and we don't want companies to be in suspense, because in the closing meeting, we say, okay, we recommend you for certification based on the findings. However, if you have major, we are waiting on those corrective actions before we submit your report to the certification committee. If they're minors, we complete the report and within 1 to 2 days, where we have a maximum of 7 days to submit the report. And then you get that decision on certification within a 4-week period. So that's basically it for the audit process and what happens during the audit process. And we make the audit as comfortable as possible. It's not that we're here to scare the auditee, because we've recognized that audits are there to help the organization. And as we go through, they must find it as a value-added process. Now, the other area I would like to share on today, and I put in the category of fair. It's not that organizations probably have not implemented the system, right? Or they may not know how well their system is operating, but I think there is a fear of audits. And these are some of the examples or some of the reasons why persons, sometimes they're reluctant to go ahead with their audit. So I'm here just to provide some additional clarification on that. So for example, they may not be aware of the certification process because it's new to them, right? And that is why we tend to hold such awareness sessions. We make contact with companies to find out how they're progressing, to provide that familiarity. So we'll encourage persons to call us if they have a question. Don't be afraid. Call us at GCS and we can provide that clarification. We recognize it's a significant investment, even though it's very competitive. And companies would not want to go through an audit and they have the mindset, oh, we can fail. But I'm sure from my presentation, you're now aware that no one fails an audit. The only time a company is not issued a certificate for an extended time is if they do not, and you have up to 6 months, if they do not address the corrective action, which is under their control. Sometimes your system may not be fully implemented, right? And you say, okay, we don't think this is the right time. But the only time you could know when is the right time is if you start the process. And at least if you start the stage 1 audit, it will tell you where you are, give you a better understanding, and you haven't to guess, okay, how far am I, what I have to do. Some people believe that when you get non-conformities, it's the end of the world. Non-conformities should be seen as areas for improvement, opportunities to improve your system. And it must be taken positively. Because if an auditor detects a non-conformity and they do not identify it as a non-conformity, it robs the organization the opportunity of addressing a problem before it escalates, and it can actually prevent customer service. So it's very important that as an auditor, you're able to identify the non-conformity so the organization has an opportunity to do corrective action before it affects the organization. And of course, with GCS, you do not lose your money. Once you've paid, right? Because with our process, once you've applied for certification, we prepare a proposal to you. And once you are in favor and you have clarity on that proposal, we request that you sign it. But before you start the audit, we encourage you to pay the certification fee in advance. So once you've paid the certification fee, and then we schedule the audit, we retain that sum for you. We do not say, okay, because you haven't completed your audit in the last 6 months, we'll forfeit your money, you have to pay us again. No, we understand what companies can be going through, and we would want to help those companies in the process, right? To ensure that they're successful, because there is a reason why an organization has applied for certification, right? There is a reason, there is an objective, and we want to be part of that process of helping you to achieve that objective. And know that it's a commitment, it's a long-term commitment because certification is renewable every 3 years. We do surveillance audits annually to ensure that you are on the ball, that you continually maintain your system, continually improve your system, and your organization continues to get better. So when you're certified, see it as a commitment to continuous growth of your organization. See it as a commitment to continual improvement, right? It's not just having the certificate, but it's your organization benefiting from having that status of certification. So in wrapping up now, in terms of checking your conformance, some people say, how do I know when I'm ready? And I will repeat again, do your internal audit and ensure that when you're doing your internal audit, you use trained and competent auditors. And these are persons who would have been trained on the requirements of the standard that you implemented and also trained as an internal auditor or a lead auditor using the ISO 19011 standard. Right? So that will at least equip them to be able to give you a value-added audit with information that is very useful for your organization to address any non-conformities or areas to improvement. And also encourage you to have team members trained on your team because interpretation of the standard is very key to the successful implementation and maintenance of your quality system, right? And that is why we have a schedule of training programs that we do annually so that organizations who have that need for training have that opportunity to have their team members trained. So at this point, I will stop for questions. Are there any questions persons would like to ask at this time?
Yes, Ms. Boswick, question number 1, right?
Yes.
Let's say if the standard requires you to have a specific system in place, but you don't have that system, but you have something alternative. Is that acceptable?
You have something, I didn't hear you just now.
Let's say the standard requires you to have a specific system in place, but you don't have that, but your system have an alternative which achieve the same outcome. Is that acceptable?
What you can do, because there's some minimum requirements in the standard, the system that you currently have, you do a gap analysis with it. So you take your system, you take the requirements of the standard, and you cross-reference to see where you're addressing what. Because the standard is very flexible. It doesn't define how things should be done, right? So in that case, what you do, you see if there are any gaps. If when you do that evaluation across your system and the standard and there are no gaps, you can say that you're in compliance. Right? Because every organization that is functioning, that is profitable, that is operating, have systems in place. So 9001 is just there as a cushion to your system. So you have to align what you have and see how it is meeting the requirements of the 9001 standard or whichever management system standard you would like to be compliant with, because that is the requirement the auditor will be auditing you to. Right?
Next thing, as part of the ISO 9000, right? Which requires staff to undergo training. But is this normal training in terms of delivery of survey, or is it specific ISO training they need to as well?
The standard does not say that you should have training on the standard. What 7.2 says on the competence is that the organization needs to determine the requirements for competence and then show how you ensure the system you have in place to ensure the competence of your personnel. So it's for the organization to determine if the staff is operating at this position, what level of competence is required. And competence would fall under the category of education, training, skills, experience. So the organization has to determine that. Right?
Okay,
And
you
when you
answered.
determine that, we basically evaluate to see how well you are implementing the system that you have determined at your organization.
Okay. Our next question is in terms of audit evidence, because normally how I conduct audit at my organization is actually be done on a cycle basis every 6 months. Now, let's say in terms of the customer, our policy is certain applications for loan must be processed within a certain period of time. So that activity there is scheduled to be done every 6 months. But because of the operation of the entity is, you don't get audited as per that cycle. Sometimes you miss like probably till in 9 months. Now let's say if you should come and the evidence would that evidence be acceptable that we are doing system improvements?
You're doing audits every 6 months, you say, but then sometimes you go beyond the time.
Yeah, because of other assignments.
Okay. So one of the important things, what I'll encourage you to do is to review your process for scheduling of audits. Schedule it at times, because remember the schedule should be communicated. Schedule it at times when the key persons will be available and when it is possible to have the audits done for your operations. But if there is evidence that you're doing audits, that will just be an area for you to improve on.
A next question which I have, you're talking about this annual review, right? Hello?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
The annual review. Normally, because I actually went through the standard, I actually did an audit, but this annual review should be done annually. But what actually happens, our organization have monthly board of director meeting. During those meetings, our system is actually considered there. Now, let's say the standard says that you should have an annual, but per se, now let's say if you have it monthly, can that satisfy the objective?
The standard doesn't say annual as management review, right? It says you should have planned arrangement for conducting your management review. Now, many companies would indicate that. I know you're not a first company where management say, okay, we have monthly meetings and we address the elements. But what I'll encourage you to do, you go to the standard at 9.3, look at the agenda items, and in your monthly meeting, right, minutes or report, cross-reference where each element of that standard is addressed. If there are no gaps, you're fine. But if there are gaps in the system, you'll need to address those. And why I say that, a management meeting that an organization has monthly or weekly with its team members has a particular focus, right? And it's highly unlikely that an organization will be addressing all of the elements in a standard, because I've audited and I've seen that before. The management review that the standard requires has another focus. This is looking at adequacy of the system, the effectiveness of the system. Is it meeting the organization's goal and direction? So it is unlikely that you can do this long-term kind of analysis at monthly meetings, because when you look at analysis of data, looking at customer satisfaction, areas like meeting customer requirements, these things can only be analyzed after gathering data over a period of time, right? So it's not a very useful process if you're going to be doing, and I doubt it because I've seen some management meeting reports, and when you audit it, they're elements. So what I encourage you to do, cross-reference it. Take your last meeting minutes, look at the standard at 9.3, and you audit it across where you address the different areas, and you'll see they're not addressed. A typical one I could highlight to you, the context of the organization. How many management meetings weekly you look at the needs and expectations of your interested parties that you would have listed in your context, or the internal and external issues that you've listed in the context. Those are things that you may not raise at a monthly meeting, right? But if you are doing it and you have everything in place, it will meet the requirements.
But in terms of the internal external issue, I see what you're actually saying. But that they would actually form part of the QMS system, how you would manage it with it. We have that. But the thing is, I hear you what you said with that, but I was just conforming because I actually done the management review meeting for this year for last year. But what I also know, it should be at least done at least once per year, right? Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
At least annually, you should have your management review meetings.
A next question which I have for you is that, is there a period of conformance before you come to audit, or we can implement before you verify this? All right, my question is, let's say we haven't have a system before you come, but the thing is that we design the system and install the system. But the thing is that we didn't get it to test the system. But once we have the system notes and the system has been implemented, how will you treat that on your audit? Is there a period that you should allow the system to work to see that it is working? Or is it possible that when you come, you will allow it to go as it is?
There must be some level of implementation, at least to the minimum requirements, because we've audited some systems in the very early stages of implementation. You would have sufficient evidence. Because remember, you have to complete your internal audit. And you would only be able to do an internal audit if there are certain basic things you've implemented. And that is why we ask you to implement, because remember, when we audit you, right, it's basically auditing how your organization has performed in the past. This is what you've been doing over the last 2 to 3 months. And it'll basically tell us, in using that system going forward, how well you will be meeting the system, implementing the system by the time we come the next year. If we go and we find that the system is very weak, because based on your observations and analysis of the objective evidence, you may say, okay, instead of waiting a year, I'll come and do an audit within 6 months to see how well you are implementing that system.
Okay.
See, Caroline, you'd like to ask a question? Those are all your questions, sorry?
Yes, for now.
Here? Okay. Yes, Caroline, you can go ahead. Caroline wanted to ask us a question. I saw a hand raised. All right, we're now hearing anyone else with a question? Lana, any questions from your end?
Hi, no, not at this time, thanks.
Okay. I see Sean Ramatan. All right. So I trust that we've been able to provide adequate clarifications so persons now can be better prepared for the certification audit and also to know what to expect when you are applying for your certification. Because once you've completed that form, even though I know some persons will send an application in advance, it's very important that the organization demonstrates its level of commitment towards implementing the system, and more so top management being involved in the whole process. And we're not hearing from Caroline. I know she has a problem with her mic, but probably you can send a message in the group, in the chat, and we can address your concern if you're not able to use your mic at this point. So just in telling you what is happening at GCS for the next quarter, for your information, we have some training programs that are scheduled for April and May. So I'd encourage you to take note of these programs and feel free to contact us if you have an interest in being trained or having a team member trained. Next week, we have the ISO 45001 requirements course. Basically, this course is specially designed for organizations desirous of implementing an occupational health and safety system. So it basically provides a framework as to how you can go about, for example, identifying the hazards within your organization and putting systems in place, how to monitor it to ensure that you have a safe work environment. And I will encourage you to register for this program. And how the 9001, those of you with the 9001 system, it's very easy now to integrate the ISO 45001 system or the ISO 14001 system within your operations. So it's very important because this training program will show you how you can do that integration also. Also, we have the ISO 9001 internal auditor course, which is coming up the last week in April, where you can have team members trained as internal auditors. I know a number of persons may be utilizing the services of consultants, but bear in mind that after that consultant would have completed the task of implementing your system and setting you off, your company into good stead, it's good that you have team members who can continue the process of doing internal audits, and you always have that resource available. The ISO 14001 requirements course during the month of May, that one basically focuses on how organizations can reduce or mitigate environmental impacts. So an organization whose activities can have positive or negative impacts to the environment would find a course like this useful, especially if you have to be complying with requirements for the Environmental Protection Agency. It will help you in meeting those requirements. Those of you who are into the oil and gas sector and more into the high-risk activities, high-risk operations, our process safety course is very key on adding safety to your processes. ISO 45001 provides you with a management system to manage the safety within your operations, whereas process safety focuses on helping you to have safe processes. That is how you execute your job safely. It's a really great course, and I would encourage persons with a high-risk operations, those operations with high potential for explosions and fires and spills, very important course for you. I see I have another hand. Mr. Mazir, you have another question?
Yes, because actually this was one of the questions I have here, which you brought up with this training. Now, the thing is that I actually read the standard, and standard requires that the internal audit department to actually be trained. But the thing is it specifically ISO training? Or because normally I'm actually an ACC and a CP, and I get training from the Institute of Internal Audit plus CPD from those professional bodies. Now, would those training be okay, or do I need specific, or do my internal audit department need ISO training?
The training that is required here is focused on management systems. How do you audit a management system? There's some similarities with how the audit is done, but the difference here within the financial audits and the internal audit here for management system is that as a management system auditor, the ISO 19011 standard provides that framework as to how you plan and execute the audit. So it may be much easier for you because the 9001 standard will be your audit criteria, right? Instead of the audit standards that you will be using for your financial audits.
Okay. Next question. Now, this training. Now, let's say if I request the audit next month, but is it necessary that I have the training before, or I could get it after the audit?
No, you don't have to do the training before, because remember, you will be providing evidence of implementing your system, evidence of probably completing an internal audit. So if let's say the internal audit does not demonstrate that it was a very effective audit, you'll just have areas as to how you can improve the next time. Probably at the end of that point, you might say, yes, probably we really need to go and do this audit training, or it's just a little tweaking we need to do.
But it's not mandatory.
No, there are no mandatory requirements that you have to be trained. Just bearing in mind, when we look at 7.2, you have to see how you determine the competence of your staff to do different activities. So auditors will come under that category. How do you determine the competence of your management system auditors, or the persons you select to do your audits?
Okay.
You can do, yes, you can do self-training and so forth also, right? But it's just recommended because of the speciality of the discipline. It's just recommended to go through formal training, but you can have in-house training and self-training. All right. Thank you for your questions. Any other question before we wrap up? Great. So I want to thank you all for joining us. It was indeed a pleasure to have you, and we trust that the information shared today will be very useful for you. Feel free to contact us at Global Compliance Service, Guyana Inc., and we can provide additional information. Companies can also request meetings with us to meet with their management team or their quality rep if they need further clarification on the process. They want to know, ask some specific questions. We're open to those types of meetings. You can also contact, when you call, you can also contact Ms. Candace Tony. She's online too, for further information about the certification process or training that we have. Continue to follow us on our Facebook page and get updates on what is happening at Global Compliance Service. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from some of you very soon, right, as we take businesses in Guyana to the next level by providing value-added audits. And remember, we are supporting local content, right? And as our slogan says, local content, global recognition. So thank you again, and do have a great rest of the day. Caroline, I'm sorry we're not able to hear you, but you can always contact us after for any specific information that you may need. Because we're not hearing. Caroline, you have another opportunity before we wrap up. All right. Thank you very much and best wishes to you.
Thanks again.
Remember,
Thanks for having us.
yes, and remember Global Compliance Service as your ISO certification provider and training provider in Guyana. So thank you again. Until another time.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.